The day had been long for the young mechanic. His hands were stained with grease, his back ached from bending over engines, and his eyes were heavy with tiredness. He worked in a small garage on the corner of a busy Los Angeles street. The shop wasn't fancy, just four walls with tools hanging everywhere, an old radio humming softly, and the smell of oil mixed with rubber. For him, it was more than a shop. It was his dream, a place where he tried to earn an honest living. As the sun dipped low, the mechanic closed up for the night. He stacked the last of the tires, wiped his hands on a dirty rag, and walked out to lock the gate. The street was quiet, the air cool with evening breeze. That was when his eyes caught a motorcycle parked near the curb. It wasn't just any motorcycle. It looked sleek, powerful, and elegant, the kind of bike you didn't see every day. Its body was painted deep black, shining under the streetlight. The chrome parts polished like mirrors. Even someone who knew little about bikes could tell this was expensive. A treasure on two wheels. The mechanic paused for a moment. Admiring it, he whispered under his breath, "What a beauty." He wondered who it belonged to. Maybe a businessman, a racer, or some collector who lived nearby? He didn't know, and he didn't care much. All he knew was that he had never seen something so perfect. Carrying a heavy toolbox in both hands, he turned back toward the shop door. His tired arms trembled slightly from the weight. His foot caught on a loose piece of wood lying on the ground. In one split second, everything went wrong. The mechanic stumbled forward. The toolbox slipped from his grip, and with a loud crash, it banged against the motorcycle. The sound was terrible, like metal tearing into metal. The bike toppled sideways, the weight of the machine pulling it down hard onto the pavement. Sparks flew as the chrome scraped against the concrete. The silence of the street was broken by the noise. People passing by turned their heads quickly. Gasps filling the air, the mechanic's eyes widened in horror. His heart sank into his stomach. No. No, 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 he cried out, dropping to his knees. He rushed to lift the motorcycle, his hands shaking as he tried to pull it upright. The machine was heavy, but panic gave him strength with all his might. He managed to raise it, breathing hard. His eyes darted across the bike, searching for damage. There it was, an ugly scratch across the black paint, like a scar cutting through flawless skin. The chrome handlebar was bent slightly, no longer perfectly straight. To most people, it might seem small, but to a true owner, it was enough to break a heart. A few people had stopped to watch. Some whispered, some pulled out their phones, recording the scene with curious eyes. The mechanic felt his throat tighten, sweat forming on his forehead even though the evening air was cool. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had ruined someone's dream bike, and then footsteps approached, slow, steady, deliberate. The mechanic looked up and his breath froze. A man in a simple black jacket and jeans walked toward the bike. His face was calm but carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. His hair was slightly messy, his walk relaxed, but his presence was powerful. The mechanic recognized him instantly. Everyone would. It was Keanu Reeves. The world seemed to stop spinning. The mechanic's hands trembled more than before. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but his voice felt locked in his chest. Keanu stood silently by the bike. His eyes scanned the scratches, the bent handlebar, the marks on the chrome. His hand gently touched the scarred paint. His face showed no anger, no shouting, no dramatic reaction, just silence. And somehow that silence was more frightening than any loud voice could ever be. The mechanic stuttered finally, I didn't mean to. I tripped. Please, I'm so sorry." His words tumbled out fast, desperate, like a man begging for air. People around them whispered louder now. Some said, "That's Keanu Reeves's bike." Others said, "Oh no, this guy is finished." The phones kept recording, and the mechanic felt the weight of every pair of eyes. Every second was heavier than the last. His knees felt weak. He wished he could turn back time. Just one moment, to step more carefully to avoid the mistake that had just changed his life. But there was no going back. The bike was damaged, and the owner was standing right there. Keanu finally looked up. His dark eyes met the mechanic's trembling ones, and in that moment, the mechanic felt like he was standing in front of a judge, waiting for his sentence. What would Keanu say? What would he do? The air was thick with tension. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The mechanic's heart beat louder than the city around him. He knew one thing for sure. Nothing in his life would ever be the same after this night. The mechanic stood frozen, his hand still resting on the scratched motorcycle. His chest rose and fell quickly as fear gripped him tighter with every second. He could not believe who was standing in front of him. Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood star known for his calm face, kind heart, and love for motorcycles. The world around seemed to vanish. The sound of cars on the street faded, and all he could hear was his own heartbeat, loud like a drum in his ears. Keanu's eyes remained on the bike. He crouched slowly, running his hand along the long scar on the black paint. His fingers traced the bent handlebar as though feeling the pain of the machine itself. He said nothing. His silence was louder than any angry shout could have been. The mechanic felt like each second of quiet was crushing his soul. People nearby whispered and pointed. "Is that Keanu Reeves?" "That's his bike," one person muttered. Another lifted their phone higher, trying to capture everything. The mechanic wanted to scream at them to stop recording, but his lips stayed sealed. He felt like the ground should open and swallow him whole. Finally, Keanu stood up. His tall figure cast a long shadow under the streetlight. He looked at the mechanic not with rage, but with an expression the mechanic could not read. Calm, serious, maybe even disappointed. That expression made the mechanic's stomach twist more than anger ever could. I didn't mean to, sir," the mechanic stammered. His words stumbled out clumsily. "I tripped. The box slipped. I can fix it, I promise," his voice cracked as he spoke. His hands kept rubbing together nervously, his body shaking like a leaf in the wind. Keanu tilted his head slightly. His voice was soft but heavy when he finally spoke. "Do you know what this bike means to me?" The mechanic swallowed hard. Unable to answer, he only shook his head slowly. Keanu stepped closer to the bike and touched the scratched chrome. "I've ridden this across miles of open road," he said quietly. "Every mark it had was part of my journey, but this—" He paused, letting his fingers rest on the new damage. "This was carelessness." His voice wasn't raised, but each word struck the mechanic like a hammer. The mechanic's knees almost buckled. His eyes burned as guilt filled him. He wanted to shout that it wasn't carelessness, that it was an accident. But deep inside, he knew that to Keanu, it looked like the work of someone who didn't care enough, someone who wasn't careful with something precious. "I can make it right," the mechanic whispered, almost begging, "Please let me repair it, no cost, no charge. I'll work all night if I have to." His voice shook as he spoke, but his eyes pleaded with honesty. Keanu's gaze stayed steady on him. The people around grew quiet, waiting for his response. Some expected Keanu to lash out. Others thought he would walk away and leave the man in shame. But Keanu did neither. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Are you the owner of this workshop?" The mechanic blinked, taken aback by the unexpected question. Yes," he said, his throat dry. "This is my garage." "My shop," his voice was small. Almost ashamed, Keanu nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "I trusted this place," he said calmly. "I thought my bike would be safe outside a mechanic's shop." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But maybe I trusted the wrong man." Those words cut deeper than any anger. The mechanic felt his chest tighten. His mouth went dry. It wasn't just about the motorcycle anymore. It was about trust, about responsibility, and about failure. And Keanu Reeves, a man admired all over the world, had just said he wasn't trustworthy. The mechanic's heart sank into a dark pit. He wanted to shout, to explain that he wasn't careless, that it was just bad luck, but his voice failed him. All he could do was bow his head in shame, his shoulders heavy with guilt. The silence stretched on. People nearby leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next. The mechanic's mind raced with fear. What if Keanu sued him? What if this video went viral online? His small shop could be ruined overnight. His dream could vanish in a single moment. Keanu finally stepped back. His calmness was unsettling. "I'm giving you a chance," he said. His voice was steady, but it carried weight. "Fix it. Make it right by tomorrow." His eyes locked onto the mechanic's. "If you fail, I'll never return here again." The mechanic's eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't punishment, it was a test, a chance to prove himself. He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I will. I promise." His words came out in a rush, desperate but determined. Keanu said nothing more. He turned and walked away, his figure fading into the shadows of the street, leaving the mechanic alone with the damaged bike and a heart heavy with fear. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some still whispering, others still recording. The mechanic ignored them. His eyes stayed on the motorcycle. His reflection stared back at him from the scratched chrome. tired, broken, but now carrying the weight of a challenge. He placed his hand on the seat gently as if apologizing to the machine itself. His mind was made up. He would not fail. He could not fail. This was more than fixing a bike. This was about saving his name, his pride, and maybe even his future. The mechanic stood alone in the quiet street, the weight of Keanu's words pressing heavy on his chest. He had promised to fix the bike, but the fear inside him was louder than his own heartbeat. The night sky stretched above him, but he felt as though a dark cloud hung only over his head. The people who had been recording slowly walked away, some shaking their heads, others whispering that this man had ruined Keanu Reeves's motorcycle. The mechanic wanted to block out their voices, but each word echoed in his mind like thunder. He dragged the damaged bike inside his small workshop. His hands trembled as he wheeled it across the floor. Every squeak of the wheels reminded him of his mistake. The light inside the shop flickered weakly. The smell of oil and grease filled the air, and for the first time, the mechanic looked at his tools not as helpers but as his only hope. He crouched beside the motorcycle. His eyes scanned the scratches, the bent handlebar, the broken shine. "I can fix this," he whispered to himself, but his voice sounded weak, almost like a lie. He shook his head, slapped his cheeks lightly, and forced himself to focus. "No. I will fix this," he said again, firmer this time. He grabbed his wrench, his hammer, his polishing kit, every tool he had. The night stretched long and lonely, but he could not stop. He sanded the paint carefully, trying to erase the scar. His fingers cramped, his eyes burned from staying open, but he pushed forward. He straightened the handlebar with all his strength, sweat dripping down his forehead. His body ached, but his heart screamed that he had no choice. Every minute, fear whispered in his ear. What if Keanu doesn't like it? What if it's not enough? What if he leaves and tells everyone never to trust you again? The mechanic shook his head, trying to drown those thoughts with the sound of his tools. He reminded himself of his dream, of how he had built this small garage from nothing, of how he had promised his late father that he would make it a place of respect. He could not let it all slip away because of one mistake. The hours dragged by. His hands grew blistered and his back screamed with pain, but he refused to stop. He polished the bike until his reflection in the black paint was clear. He tightened every bolt, checked every wire, made sure the machine was not only repaired but stronger. At one point his body begged him to rest, his eyes closed for a second, his head nodding forward. But then he imagined Keanu's calm eyes looking at him with disappointment. He imagined the words, "Maybe I trusted the wrong man," and it was enough to jolt him awake. He forced himself back to work, even though his arms felt like lead. Outside, the city grew silent. The night grew colder, but inside the small workshop, the air was hot with effort. His shirt clung to his body with sweat. His hands shook with exhaustion, but he kept going. His mind replayed the scene of the accident again and again. Each time he saw the bike fall, he worked harder, faster, more desperately. By dawn, his body was broken, but the motorcycle stood gleaming under the dim light. The scratches were gone, the handlebar straightened, the chrome shining like new. He had done everything he could. Every part of him hoped it would be enough. The mechanic leaned against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor. His chest rose and fell slowly, his breath heavy. His eyes stared at the bike with both pride and fear. He whispered, "Please let him see the effort. Let him see I tried with my heart." His voice cracked, his eyelids grew heavy, and before he realized it, sleep pulled him into darkness. But even in sleep, his dreams were filled with shadows of doubt. He saw Keanu walking into the shop, shaking his head, turning away. He saw people laughing, calling him a failure. He woke with a start, his heart pounding, only to realize morning light was already creeping in through the windows. The mechanic stood up quickly, rubbing his tired eyes. He splashed cold water on his face, combed back his messy hair, and looked once more at the bike. It was the best he had ever done. Every piece checked twice, every polish done with care, but deep inside he feared it might still not be enough. He unlocked the shop door, letting the fresh morning air flow inside. He sat quietly, waiting. Every sound from outside making his heart jump. Every car that passed made him look up, wondering if it was him. Wondering if Keanu had come to see the result. Minutes felt like hours. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry. He kept whispering prayers to himself, asking for one thing, that his hard work would not go unseen. And then, he heard footsteps. Steady, calm, familiar. His chest tightened as the figure appeared at the door. It was Keanu Reeves, walking in with the same quiet presence as before. His eyes went straight to the bike. His face showed no emotion. The mechanic's breath caught. His heart thumped so loudly he thought Keanu might hear it. This was the moment, the test, the truth, everything he had done, every ounce of strength, every drop of sweat. It all came down to what Keanu Reeves would say next. The shop was silent as Keanu stepped inside. His boots made soft sounds on the concrete floor, and the mechanic felt each step like thunder in his chest. He stood quickly, wiping his oily hands on his shirt, even though the stains would not disappear. His throat was dry, and his legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stand tall. Keanu's eyes never left the motorcycle. He walked around it slowly, his hand brushing lightly across the polished surface. The black paint gleamed under the dim workshop light, the scratches gone, the chrome shining. For a moment, the mechanic thought he saw approval in Keanu's face, but then his stomach twisted again as Keanu crouched down, looking closer. The mechanic's heart raced. Sweat formed on his forehead. He wanted to speak, to explain how hard he had worked through the night, but fear kept his lips sealed. Instead, he watched nervously as Keanu tested the handlebar, pressed the brakes, and ran his fingers across the repaired paint. Finally, Keanu stood up straight, his face calm, his eyes sharp. He looked directly at the mechanic, and the silence stretched heavy between them. The mechanic felt his chest tighten. Then Keanu spoke, his voice steady. "You fixed it." The mechanic let out a shaky breath of relief. His lips almost curled into a smile. He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I worked all night. I wanted to make it right." His words rushed out, desperate to prove his sincerity, but Keanu's expression didn't soften. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You fixed it with your hands," he said, "but not with your heart." Those words hit the mechanic harder than any punch. He blinked in confusion, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. His heart sank again, the little hope he had built inside him shattering. He whispered, What do you mean?" Keanu's eyes stayed locked on his, calm but piercing. "Machines are not just metal," he said softly. "They carry memories. They carry stories. They carry trust." He glanced at the bike. "This one has been with me through journeys, through lonely nights, through freedom on the road. It is more than just a machine." His gaze returned to the mechanic. "And when you repaired it, I didn't feel your care. I didn't feel your respect. I only saw your fear." The mechanic felt his knees weaken. He wanted to argue, to say that he had worked with all his strength, but deep inside he knew Keanu was right. He had worked with fear in his heart, fear of losing everything, fear of being shamed, not out of love for the bike or the craft itself. His eyes grew moist and he lowered his head. He whispered, "I was scared. I didn't want to lose your trust." His voice cracked. "But I understand." Keanu's silence felt heavy again. The mechanic could hear his own breathing, loud and shaky. The city outside seemed far away, and in that little garage it was only him and Keanu, standing face to face, one judged, the other judge. Finally, Keanu spoke again. "Do you know why people trust me when I ride with them?" His tone was calm but carried weight. "Because I respect every detail, every sound, every turn of the wheel. I ride with heart, not just with hands." He stepped back slightly, his eyes never leaving the mechanic. "You should do the same with your work." The mechanic swallowed hard. His chest ached with shame, but also with a strange spark of realization. Keanu wasn't angry. He wasn't here to destroy him. He was here to teach him. And yet, the words felt heavier than punishment, because they carried truth. The mechanic whispered again, "I understand. I will do better. I will not just repair. I will respect. His voice was low but honest. Keanu gave no smile, no nod, only silence. He reached for his helmet, which had been resting on the seat of the bike. He placed it under his arm and looked around the workshop one last time. The air felt thick, as if even the walls were listening. Then he said quietly, "You have skill, but skill without heart is empty." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it cut deep into the mechanic's soul. If you want to survive in this world, you need more than hands. You need respect. You need responsibility. The mechanic felt tears burn in his eyes, but he held them back. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he whispered again. Keanu walked to the bike, mounted it with calm ease, and started the engine. The motorcycle roared to life, its sound strong and deep. People outside turned their heads, recognizing the voice of the machine. Keanu looked once at the mechanic, then drove off slowly into the street, disappearing into the morning light. The mechanic stood there long after the sound of the engine faded. His body felt empty, his shop felt colder, his hands hung at his sides. His reflection looked back at him from the now silent tools on the wall. His mind replayed Keanu's words again and again. "You fixed it with your hands, but not with your heart." The mechanic knew those words would stay with him forever. They were more than criticism, they were truth, and he realized he was at a turning point. He could change or he could fall for now. All he felt was the weight of failure pressing down. His heart whispered the same painful truth. Maybe Keanu Reeves was right. Maybe he was not the man people could trust. The mechanic sat alone in his shop after Keanu rode away. The sound of the motorcycle had faded into the distance, but the words remained loud inside his head. "You fixed it with your hands, but not with your heart." He repeated those words again and again, each time they felt heavier. He stared at his tools, at the empty floor, and at the place where the bike had stood. His chest ached with shame. But he knew he could not stop there. He had been given a chance. Keanu had not walked away in anger. He had not shouted. He had given him a test. The mechanic wiped his face, his hands shaking. He muttered, "If I have to prove myself, I will. I will not fail again." He locked the shop for a moment and walked to a nearby parts supplier. The sun was rising, the city waking up, but his mind was already racing. He bought new polish, stronger paint, and a set of rare replacement pieces, things he normally wouldn't buy because they were expensive. But this time, money didn't matter. His reputation, his honor, his dream, they mattered more back at the shop. He set everything out neatly for once. His workbench looked clean, organized, ready. He touched the polished pieces carefully, like they were sacred, and whispered, "This time, I will put my heart into it." He imagined Keanu's face again, that calm but piercing look. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. And disappointment was worse. The mechanic thought about his own father, a man who had once taught him how to fix old cars. He remembered how his father used to say, "Don't just repair the metal. Repair the trust of the man who gives it to you." At that moment, those words finally made sense. He rolled up his sleeves and began working again. Not just repairing, but treating every piece like it was alive. He didn't rush this time, he slowed down, listening to every sound the metal made, feeling every turn of the wrench. He cleaned with patience, he polished with care. He even whispered to the machine softly, "I'm sorry for before, you deserve better." Hours passed, but he did not grow restless. His hands moved with more steady rhythm now. His fear was still there, but something else had joined it, respect. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a promise to himself. He wanted to prove he could be trusted while he worked. Customers passed by the shop, some peeked in, whispering about what had happened the night before. The news had spread fast. People were saying the mechanic had damaged Keanu Reeves's bike. Some laughed, some shook their heads. Others took photos of the empty street where the bike had been. The mechanic ignored them. He had no time for gossip. All that mattered was the work. When the sun began to set, the mechanic finally leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. The motorcycle gleamed like new. Every corner was polished. Every part checked 3 times. The scratches were gone, the paint smooth as glass. The bent handlebar replaced with a stronger piece. For the first time, he felt pride, not in just finishing, but in truly giving his heart, but his chest was still tight. He knew Keanu would return soon and he would see everything. The mechanic whispered to himself, "Please let him feel it this time. Let him see that I cared," that night. He stayed in the shop again, but not out of panic this time. He stayed to make sure everything was perfect. He touched the bike again and again, checking every bolt, every detail. He barely slept, resting only for minutes before jumping up to look at it again. By morning, he was exhausted but ready. His heart pounded as he heard the sound of footsteps approaching once more. He stepped outside and there he was, Keanu Reeves, walking toward the shop with the same calm, unreadable face. People had gathered again, whispering, filming. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen this time. Keanu entered the shop. His eyes fell on the bike instantly. He walked around it slowly, running his hand along the smooth paint. Touching the replaced handlebar, he crouched down, his face close to the polished chrome. The mechanic held his breath, sweat dripping from his forehead. Every second felt like a lifetime. Keanu stood up at last. He didn't speak immediately. His face gave nothing away. The mechanic's chest tightened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He whispered, "I tried again, sir. I gave it everything. I swear I gave it my heart this time." His voice cracked. The silence grew heavy. Everyone outside leaned closer. Waiting for Keanu's words, the mechanic felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Finally, Keanu spoke, his voice low but clear. "Better," he said. He looked at the mechanic. "This time I see effort, I see respect." His eyes softened just a little. "But remember, respect cannot come only when you are scared. It must always be there." The mechanic's knees almost gave out. Relief washed over him, but so did another wave of responsibility. He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I understand. From now on I will work with respect always, not just with fear." Keanu placed a hand lightly on the bike, then looked back at the mechanic. His words carried both warning and guidance. "You pass this time," he said. "Don't waste the lesson." With that, Keanu turned. Placing his helmet under his arm again, he walked out slowly, leaving behind silence so thick that the mechanic could barely breathe. The crowd outside erupted in whispers and murmurs. Some smiled, some frowned, but all of them knew. Something important had just happened in that small garage. The mechanic stood there, breathing hard, his eyes stinging with tears. He had been tested, and though he wasn't perfect, he had been given another chance, and in his heart, he promised himself he would never again work with only his hands, but always with his heart. The next morning felt heavier than the last. The mechanic had not slept properly in 2 nights. His eyes were red, his body weak, but his mind was sharp. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Keanu's face, calm but serious. His words echoed again and again. "Respect cannot come only when you are scared. It must always be there." The mechanic repeated them like a prayer. The bike stood gleaming in the workshop, polished so well it seemed to glow under the soft light. The mechanic had done everything possible. He had worked with heart this time, he believed it, but still, a question haunted him. Would Keanu believe it too? Would he see the difference? The shop door creaked open, and for a moment, the mechanic's chest tightened. He thought it was Keanu again, but it was only a neighbor passing by. The neighbor looked at the bike, whistled, and said, "That looks better than new." The mechanic forced a smile, but inside he felt no peace. Compliments from neighbors meant little when the true test was still to come. Soon the sound of a motorcycle engine outside caught everyone's attention. Heads turned, whispers began. Phones were lifted once again. Keanu Reeves had arrived. He stepped into the workshop calmly, his jacket slightly open, his eyes steady as always. The mechanic's throat went dry. He wiped his hands on his already dirty shirt, trying to hide how much they shook. Keanu's presence was powerful, not because he shouted, but because he didn't need to. Silence followed him like a shadow. Keanu walked toward the bike without saying a word. His eyes scanned it carefully. He leaned down, touched the polished paint, and ran his fingers across the replaced handlebar. His face remained unreadable. The mechanic felt his heart hammering, every breath heavy in his chest. Then Keanu did something different. He swung his leg over the bike and sat on it. The mechanic froze, his stomach twisted with nerves. This was the real test. Keanu's hands gripped the handlebar. His fingers pressed the brake, his foot touched the pedal. He tested each part slowly, carefully. The sound of the brake squeaking softly filled the room. The mechanic watched, sweat dripping down his temple. He whispered under his breath, "Please, please work. Don't fail me now." He had checked everything twice, but in that moment doubt screamed louder than logic. Keanu's eyes lifted to meet his. "You worked hard," he said simply. His voice was calm, almost soft for a second. The mechanic thought relief would flood him, but then Keanu added, "But hard work is not always enough." The mechanic's heart sank again, his legs trembled. "What do you mean?" he asked in a shaky voice. Keanu looked at the brake again, pressing it lightly. "It works," he said, "but it doesn't feel right." His words were like a knife. Quiet but sharp, he tapped the handlebar. "The strength is there, but the balance is missing." He leaned back slightly, his eyes steady. "You repaired it, yes, but you didn't listen to it." The mechanic felt crushed. His mind replayed the endless hours he had spent polishing, tightening, adjusting. He had given everything, yet it wasn't enough. He whispered, almost to himself, "I thought I had done it with heart this time." Keanu's gaze softened just slightly. "Effort shows, but mastery comes when you listen. Not when you fight," he said. "A machine speaks if you respect it enough. It will tell you what it needs." He tapped the fuel tank gently. "This one is still speaking, but you are not hearing it." The mechanic lowered his head, his cheeks burned with shame. Outside, people whispered again. Some said, "He failed again." Others shook their heads. Recording every moment, the mechanic felt small, smaller than ever. Keanu stood up, swinging his leg off the bike. He adjusted his jacket and looked around the shop. His voice steady, he said, "You have skill, you have strength, but you still lack patience." He stepped closer to the mechanic. "Fixing a machine is like caring for a friend. You can't just patch the wound. You must heal it." The mechanic swallowed hard. His chest heavy, his voice quiet. I will try again." His words were desperate, honest, almost like a plea. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Trying is not enough," he said calmly. "You must become the kind of man who does not need to try, only to do." Those words hit the mechanic deep in his soul. He felt tears stinging his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I understand." Keanu took one last look at the bike, then turned toward the door, his steps slow, measured. The mechanic watched him leave, the sound of his boots fading. The crowd outside parted as Keanu walked away, and soon the shop was quiet again. The mechanic stood in the silence. His hands trembling, he looked at the bike, the very machine he had poured his sweat and heart into, yet it still wasn't enough. His shoulders slumped, and he leaned against the wall, his mind spinning. He whispered to himself, "Not enough, never enough." His voice broke. He thought of all the long nights, all the effort, and still, the disappointment on Keanu's face haunted him. For the first time, he felt a real fear, not just of losing a customer, not just of losing reputation, but of losing himself. If he couldn't earn respect with his work, then what did he have left? The shop was filled with silence, broken only by his heavy breathing. The mechanic knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about a bike. It was about who he was as a man, and whether he truly deserved to call himself a mechanic at all. Word spread faster than the mechanic could have imagined. By the afternoon, people were whispering all over the neighborhood. Some said the mechanic had failed Keanu Reeves. Others said Keanu himself had declared the shop unworthy. The truth was twisted in every direction, but one thing was certain. The shop that once had a steady flow of customers was now empty. The mechanic sat behind his counter, staring at the silent garage. The sound of tools clinking, of engines humming, of laughter from workers, it was all gone. The walls seemed to close in on him, and the air felt heavy. His stomach growled, but he had no appetite. The only thing filling him was shame. Day by day, fewer people came by. Some only peeked inside to see the place that ruined Keanu's bike, then left without speaking. A few even smirked, shaking their heads. One man muttered loudly outside, "If he can't satisfy Keanu Reeves, how can he fix anyone else's car?" The mechanic heard every word, and each one cut deeper. Bills started to pile up on his desk. Electricity, rent, suppliers, all demanding payment. His savings were already thin. He had hoped the shop would grow, but now it felt like it was shrinking, choking him. He sat at night with the bills spread in front of him, his head in his hands, whispering, "What have I done? What have I lost?" When he tried to step outside, people stared at him differently, not with respect, but with doubt. Some even avoided him. As if failure could spread like a disease, children who once waved at him now pointed and giggled. "That's the man who broke the movie star's bike," they whispered. His heart sank every time he tried to call old customers, offering discounts, promising fast repairs, but most of them only gave excuses. "We'll call you later," they said, or "We already found someone else." Their voices were polite, but their distance was clear. The trust was gone. Nights became the hardest. The garage, once his second home, now felt like a prison. He would sit on the floor near the tools, staring at his hands, the same hands that had once built, repaired and created. Now they felt useless. His father's words came back to him again. A mechanic without respect is just a man turning bolts. And right now, he felt like less than that. Sometimes he thought about closing the shop forever. He imagined locking the doors, selling the tools, and walking away. But then he would remember Keanu's calm face, his quiet voice saying, "You must become the kind of man who does not need to try, only to do." That voice echoed in his mind. Not as an insult, but as a challenge, but still, the weight of reality was cruel. Without customers, without income, he began selling things from his own home just to keep the lights on. He sold his old TV, his spare radio, even a watch that had belonged to his father. Each sale hurt, each item carried memories, but he told himself he had no choice. And yet, even with all that, the debts grew, collectors came knocking. Their voices were sharp, demanding money he did not have. He would bow his head and say, "Please give me time. I will pay." But their eyes were cold. They didn't care about his story. They only cared about the numbers written on paper. Loneliness wrapped around him like a blanket. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors stopped talking. Even his small joys, like listening to music while working, felt hollow now. He sat in silence most nights, staring at the empty garage, wondering if this was the end. One evening as the sun set, he sat outside the shop, his head down. A group of men walked by and laughed. "That's him, the mechanic who thought he could impress a movie star," one said loudly. The others laughed. The mechanic felt his face burn with shame. He wanted to disappear. His heart whispered that he had nothing left. Inside, the bike was gone. Keanu had taken it with him, but its absence felt like a shadow that never left. Every corner of the shop reminded him of that night, the crash, the scratch, the silence. He rubbed his hands together and whispered, "I lost everything, because I wasn't enough." The world that once felt full of chances now felt empty. He thought of his father again, of how proud he had been when the shop first opened. And now that pride was gone, replaced by whispers, doubt, and failure. The mechanic sat on the cold floor, his back against the wall, the bills still stacked on the counter. He closed his eyes and let the silence swallow him. His chest rose and fell slowly, heavy with the weight of regret. In that silence, one truth remained. He had lost not just money or customers, but something far greater. He had lost trust, he had lost his name, and without those, what was left for him? Nothing but an empty shop, an empty heart, and the memory of words that would never leave him. You fixed it with your hands, but not with your heart. And in that dark hour, he realized those words had cost him everything. The mechanic sat in the silence of his empty shop. His eyes were heavy, his heart heavier. The bills on the counter looked like a mountain he could never climb. The sound of laughter from the street outside cut into him. Every whisper reminded him of his failure. Every look from a passerby felt like judgment. He was no longer seen as a hard-working man. He was only seen as the one who had failed Keanu Reeves. Days turned into weeks and the shop grew colder. Dust began to settle on the unused tools. The floor stayed empty. No cars, no bikes, no customers. The radio in the corner had gone silent. The mechanic no longer turned it on. He didn't want music. He didn't want distraction. He only sat with his thoughts. At night he lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. His mind played the same scene over and over. The clatter of the toolbox, the bike falling. Keanu's calm voice saying, "You fixed it with your hands, but not with your heart." Those words had become a chain around his neck. They pulled him deeper into regret every day. One evening, when the sun was sinking and the sky turned orange, the mechanic walked outside his shop and looked at the road. He remembered the first time he had opened the garage. How proud he had been. His father had stood by his side then, patting him on the shoulder saying, "Son, always remember, people don't just bring you machines, they bring you their trust." The mechanic closed his eyes, and for the first time tears rolled down his cheeks. He had broken that trust, not just Keanu's, but everyone's. The next morning, He cleaned the shop slowly, not because he had customers, but because he wanted to feel useful. He wiped the dust off the counters, arranged the tools, and swept the floor. The shop still looked empty, but at least it looked alive again. As he worked, he thought about what he had lost. Not only money and customers, but respect, dignity, and pride, he whispered. Maybe this is the price I had to pay for not listening, for not caring enough. For a while, he thought of closing the shop forever. He imagined selling it, walking away, and finding some other work. Maybe as a helper in another garage, maybe as a delivery man. But something inside him resisted. A small voice that said, "This place is still yours. This dream is still yours. Don't abandon it." So instead of closing, he chose to change. He decided that even if no one trusted him anymore, he would work as if they did. Every day. He practiced with machines that nobody brought in. Old engines, broken chains, rusted parts. He repaired them slowly, carefully, with patience. He spoke to them sometimes, whispering, "I will treat you better this time." It was strange, but it gave him peace. Weeks passed, and though no big customer came, one old man with a broken scooter stopped by. He looked nervous, unsure. The mechanic bowed his head respectfully and said softly, "I will do my best, sir, not just with my hands, but with my heart." The old man raised his eyebrow but left the scooter. When he returned the next day, the scooter ran smoother than it had in years. The old man smiled faintly, and though he paid little, he shook the mechanic's hand and said, "I trust you." Those two words warmed the mechanic's chest. It was not fame, not money, but it was something even greater. It was trust. The very thing he thought he had lost forever. He realized then that respect could be rebuilt. Not in one night, not with one repair, but slowly. One act of honesty at a time. Still, he never forgot the lesson Keanu had given him. It lived inside his heart, shaping every move. Every time he touched a machine, he remembered to treat it not as metal, but as a story. Every time he spoke to a customer, he remembered it was not just about fixing, but about honoring trust. In the end, he had lost almost everything. His customers, his reputation, his pride. But he had gained a truth that was worth more than all of that. A mistake wasn't just about scratches on metal. It was about responsibility, about respect, about heart. The mechanic stood one night in his shop, the moonlight spilling in through the window. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred, and whispered, "From now on, I work with heart, not fear." His voice was steady, his eyes clear. And though the road ahead was long, though he might never see Keanu Reeves again, he knew one thing for certain: his life, his work, and his dream would never be the same, because he finally understood. A true mechanic does not just fix machines. A true mechanic repairs trust,